From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and in today's lineup, K-State's Dan O'Brien will talk about the relative strength of local wheat price basis here in Kansas as the harvest is well underway as part of his weekly segment on the grain market trends. Out of the University of Nebraska, Brad Lubben will take a look at the version of the 2018 Farm Bill that cleared the Senate Agriculture Committee earlier this week, and how it differs from the House version, which is expected to be up for a revote soon. Further ahead, K-State's Romulo Lollato will offer his latest harvest observations on the productivity of the Kansas wheat crop, and K-State's Mary Knapp awaits to talk Kansas agricultural weather. That's what's ahead on this Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Thanks for tuning in to this Agriculture Today, our Friday edition. And the grain markets are our first item of interest today in the wake of the USDA's monthly World Agricultural Supply and Demand estimates. And as we're fully immersed in the wheat harvest here in Kansas, we will spend extra time on the wheat trade and the supply and demand numbers there. Along with us, once more, via phone, is Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. He is working, as usual, out of Colby. Before we lend most of our time to the wheat scene, Dan, on corn and soybeans, the stocks numbers projected by the USDA, well, they were pared back from the department's estimates of last month.
Well, that's correct. I think the big number at the end of all the calculations in the corn market was that the USDA was basically tied in with the USDA's projection of an ending stocks figure for the next marketing year. Again, 2018-19, the August 31st, 2019, an ending stocks number below 1.6 billion bushels, in particular 1.577 billion. That was down over 100 million from the May projection. And from this current marketing year, again, for August 31st, USA is basically projecting about 2.1 billion. So from 2.1 billion ending stocks this year, with planted acreage as it is, and expectations for yields, etc., you're seeing a reduction now in USDA's official number from 2.1 billion down to 1.6, and seeing things tighten up enough to where it's providing support for market prospects for corn. There was some positive news also for soybeans. Projection had been, coming into this report, ending stocks for that new crop marketing year of about 415 million, came in at 385. But I think that has almost been wiped away from the trade's perspective right now, given the rainfall we've had, and in their mind, traders' minds in general, the idea that rain makes grain or beans, and with sizable plantings going in, I think we've turned our eyes pretty dramatically towards production prospects in the U.S. And while we're waiting for the China-U.S. trade issues to work out, we still haven't seen a major bump yet in U.S. soybean shipments. So until that comes, until these issues with China get resolved, we just may have to wait on that. The wheat numbers also came in with a year-over-year decrease, projection of about 946 million bushels, and that would be, again, next May 31st of 2019. We basically started this 18-19 marketing year on June the 1st, so we're into it now. And that would be down about 130 or so million bushels from what's projected that we had for ending stocks on August 31st. So really positive numbers on the ending stocks figures across the board. And the market paid attention to it for a day and then was down on Wednesday, down again on Thursday. So it had about one day of market full focus. And then we went on from there. So when you look at yesterday's close and see the wheat market down, the July contract down 16 3/4 cents, September 16 3/4 as well, 15.60 across the board. You're just seeing harvest happening, and the futures markets responding in kind. And maybe the news that we have some pretty decent protein wheat here in our areas. Of course, we got it by duress because of tough weather, but when we have higher protein wheat here, it lessens the demand a bit for hard red spring. So maybe there's that type of interplay to consider as a possibility for why hard red spring wheat futures right now are weakening.
But as we hone in on wheat even closer and look at the basis levels being paid at Kansas elevators, again, right here in the midst of harvest, we see remarkably strong basis, Dan.
Yes, our friends at Kansas Wheat, Justin Gilpin, Aaron Harries, etc., have been trumpeting this, making sure that folks notice that, basis levels have improved. Here on yesterday's closes in central Kansas, we're looking at basis bids at major terminals from 20 under to 20 over. And that compares to where we were in the latter part of December last year. Well, we were running 39 under to 80 under. And of course, there's even a hard white wheat bid there of basically 15 over July for white wheat. So we just want to acknowledge that white wheat is happening in Kansas. Western Kansas, basis bids from 50 under, and that's mainly one or two more northwestern locations, to 15 under. And that compares to bids of 58 to 85 under, again, last December. So stronger basis bids. The reports we're reading are that both domestic mills and Kansas elevators would benefit from having higher protein wheat. The mills, of course, accomplish what they need to in terms of making their flour products and such, and the elevators to take high protein wheat that could be available and help blend it with some of the last 1 or 2 years of lower protein wheat harvest that in some cases they still have in storage. So a lot of demand for high protein wheat, and so I guess it'd be challenging to figure if you're an ag producer and you have this stuff, even though you've got disappointing yields in a lot of cases. We hear reports of 25, 35 bushels per acre, and not being that uncommon in the southern part of the state as harvest gears up. That with your low bushels, if you can pull a price premium out of that and benefit from that, well, that's, as an economic decision maker, that's just a wonderful thing. So we have a lot of segments of the wheat industry in the central and southern plains that would really benefit from higher protein wheat, and it looks like these basis bids that we've been talking about are really reflecting that.
All of this, though, speaks to that standard question at harvest time to store or to sell that harvested wheat, even if it's not of a higher end protein. And that leads us to your fresh new projections on wheat price probabilities based on the USDA's supply and demand numbers, etc. What do those basically tell us?
Well, they first of all present the USDA's projection and force a person to say, what probability do you think we have that the USDA is right on? And the USDA even asks themselves that question. If you look at their info, they have, again, statistical probability guesses on the high and low side. So I think in fairness, again, the USDA is out in the fields doing good, sound analysis. There's probably 55-60% probability that they're right. But they could be off in some areas. And if, again, by my own judgment, if you give them the lion's share of the benefit, that they're probably about 3 out of 5 chances right, there's about a 25% chance, I would think, that we could still end up with a lower production number. And again, by lower, again, the USDA projected yields for this year about 46.9. By my thinking, lower production would be yields of about 45 bushel per acre, and a difference in production of about 100 million bushels. With that, then you take the ending stocks figures down, by about from 946 million bushels that the USDA had projected for ending stocks for the new crop marketing year down to about 835. It would affect the price. The USDA has projected a midpoint of about 510 in a range of about 460 to 560. if the USDA was off by 100 million bushels, and in hard red country, it could happen. By the time all of harvest is done, then you're adding probably about 60 to 70 cents a bushel, at least as I look at the models and the historic price relationships. There is the possibility, then we'll have to wait to see it, of course, and it's out there every year, that crops in these other parts of the world, the Black Sea in particular, Australia as well, they could be low, and that could force the world market to come to the U.S. to buy wheat. If you add about say 175, 150, 200 million bushels to U.S. export demand, it would be a great thing for U.S. prices. Take the ending stocks figure down to closer to 33, 35%, and instead of 510 wheat and the range of 460 to 560, you're probably looking at 620, 625, thereabouts, something like that. And, of course, the real game changer would be to find ourselves short by 100 million bushels and have a shortage elsewhere in the world, and then suddenly, gosh, we're looking at 650, 660 million bushels of carry-out stocks to use below 30%, prices around 650 or something like that, if not higher. So those are the possibilities, but the market, as it looked at things yesterday, judged July wheat to be 522 and a quarter. And that's not including any of these other shortfalls in there of production or stronger exports in place. So right now they're not counting those things in the market, and that's probably in the midst of harvest. That's probably the judicious choice. But as you asked earlier, as we jumped into this, those possibilities are the types of issues that if someone decides not to sell at harvest and hold, that's what they're trying to weigh the likelihood of, and with the idea that they get a price return and it helps them profitability-wise.
Well, this is a timely read, Dan's freshly minted wheat market outlook for mid-June 2018, producers on the agmanager.info website. Take a look at it for yourself. And Dan, thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Grain market analysis and comment from Research and Extension grain market economist Dan O'Brien. And we'll be back with more after this. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Agriculture Today continues now here on the K-State Radio Network. As you well know by now, the Senate Agriculture Committee this past Wednesday approved its version of the 2018 Farm Bill that will go eventually to the floor of the Senate, possibly by month's end. And we want to take a look at that proposal in a bit more detail and to talk of how it might compare to whatever the House of Representatives ends up with in its next vote, and then what the process will look like from there. Brad Lubben has been good enough to join us once again from his office in Lincoln, Nebraska. He is an agricultural policy specialist with the University of Nebraska Extension Service and a former agricultural economist here at K-State. So, Brad, the Senate was fairly definitive on its vote. It was not quite unanimous out of committee, but very closely so, and this was billed widely by committee members as a bipartisan effort.
That's right. What we saw in the Senate is certainly very different than what we witnessed last month in the House, but the Senate worked diligently before meeting in committee to craft the kind of compromise that could pass out of committee and presumably pass on the floor of the Senate. One dissenting vote from Senator Charles Grassley of Iowa over some consideration of payment limit rules that may come up again on the floor. So really overall strong support and a general coalition around the language in the Senate version of the Farm Bill.
And this version, Brad, is being widely talked of as quite similar to the existing farm legislation. Do you characterize it in that way?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the Senate version of the bill is largely status quo, as it's been described. even the House version fundamentally was status quo in terms of the farm portion of the bill. Was largely status quo, which is what you'd expect in a down farm economy. There was a lot of push about trying to preserve the safety net, strengthen it where possible, but to certainly maintain the support. And both the House and Senate versions really do fundamentally maintain the commodity program and crop insurance programs as we know them for producers. There were some changes particularly highlighted for cotton and dairy, but those were addressed earlier in February, and then the language of the Farm Bill proposals themselves actually really only made relatively modest changes from that stance going forward.
Considering that the Senate bill does maintain similarities with current legislation, what elements within it do you think are worth illustrating here and pulling out for consideration?
Well, importantly for producers, I think it's important to remember both the House and the Senate version look to continue the ARC and PLC programs going forward. Both of them presumably will offer producers a new enrollment decision in 2019. So they're still living with the current farm program for the current production year, but know that there is a new decision, a new analysis coming up next year under either version of legislation here. Frankly, even if a farm bill doesn't get done, as an aside here, we should say, even if a farm bill doesn't get done and we only extend current legislation, we're likely to see a new decision in 2019 as well. So that's an important reminder to keep on the calendar for next year. Mm-hmm. Relative to the commodity programs themselves, there have been proposed changes in both chambers to the ARC program, predominantly with the yield data and the yield calculation, to try and strengthen the source of the yield data, presumably moving from some of the survey data collected by NASS to some of the yield records collected by crop insurance, but fundamentally to strengthen that data set and to potentially improve the guarantees and performance provided in the county-based ARC program. The House version eliminated the individual coverage plan based on, frankly, very low enrollment and participation to date. The Senate version does not address that at this point in time, but we could watch what happens there. The House version proposed to bump up the reference prices if market prices went above reference rates for a substantial enough period of time. If a market price is above a reference price, then some sort of acceleration of the reference price could occur. Well, that might increase overall support. Of course, that would come at some potential budget cost. The Senate does not address that. Conversely, there was pressure in the Senate from Senator John Thune of South Dakota and others to try and substantially strengthen the ARC program. And one of the ways to strengthen the ARC program was a proposal to bump up the guarantee or to improve the payout of the program and to pay for it by actually cutting the reference prices in the PLC program. So in the House, which was led by a chairman from Texas, the proposal was to strengthen the PLC program. In the Senate, led by a chairman from Kansas, but an amendment from the Upper Midwest was to strengthen the ARC program. Not surprisingly, there's efforts in different regions to try and strengthen those sort of respective elements of the program. Mm-hmm. Those are differences we will have to sort out yet going forward here, but it does look like a fairly status quo version of ARC and PLC under the next bill.
Now, within the commodity title, however, perhaps a more debatable item would be payment limitations. Mm-hmm. In fact, the one dissenting vote on the Senate Agriculture Committee had to do with that subject.
That's right. The treatment of payment limits is very different between the two chambers at this point, technically between the two committees, given that a bill hasn't passed either chamber yet. But in the House version, there was actually a proposal language to loosen current payment rules. Mind you, remember there are payment rules that affect the total amount of payments that can be received under a given program or under the portfolio of support programs, the total dollars that can be received per person per year. There are rules relating to a means test and adjusted gross income cap in order to be eligible for payments. And then there are rules relating to eligibility, specifically the entity or the operation being an eligible entity, and the individuals that make up that operation, each individually being eligible in terms of active engagement of labor and or management. Well, the House proposed to loosen some of those rules that might expand the eligible payment recipients. The Senate has proposed in the language to tighten the adjusted gross income cap from $900,000 to $700,000, and the one major amendment offered by Senator Grassley of Iowa was to tighten down payment limit rules further in terms of the active engagement test. How many people on an operation can really be actively engaged if they're not physically providing regular labor on that operation. So the Senate looked to tighten some of the rules. The House has looked to loosen some of those rules. That will be a major point of contention that we have to address going forward.
Now, we're going to leave a ton of stones unturned with respect to the content of the entire bill. We've just hit upon a few of those things within the commodity title. There's obviously considerably more to the proposal. But let's look forward in our remaining time here. The House, again, failed to pass its version, but it, you think, will be likely up for a vote again soon, as is?
It appears that the House is prepared to revote on the bill that they left standing in May. When the vote failed in May, there was a motion to reconsider filed, which at least gave the parliamentary mechanism to bring the bill back up for a vote. When it failed in May, it was fundamentally a function of losing the entire support of the Democratic side of the aisle, as well as 30 Republican votes. About half of those votes came from members of the Freedom Caucus, the defined conservative wing of the Republican Party, who, at least publicly, were said to be holding out for a vote on a conservative immigration bill. Well, they've gotten that promise that there will, in fact, be a vote on 2 immigration bills here in the House yet this month. And if that promise is upheld, then it appears that they're ready to vote for the Farm Bill, and thus bringing the Farm Bill back up for a vote gets it much closer to the threshold of passage. They may still have to satisfy a few other members to vote for it, but it appears certainly that there's more momentum to get a House bill done this month. Similarly, I would say the Senate bill has been promised time here for debate before the 4th of July recess as well. And so by the end of the month, we could very well have both a House and Senate bill done, and one more step down the road towards eventual Farm Bill completion.
But that final step in conference committee may be a bit more protracted, you think, because of the likely differences in the two bills, particularly if the House stands fast with its legislation.
Absolutely. We note there are major differences between the bills. We've just talked about what are relatively minor differences in the commodity title, but there are differences in conservation, and there are particularly differences in the nutrition title and the SNAP program. Just getting bills out of either chamber is an important step, but the differences are substantial, and the ultimate compromise to get a bill that can pass both chambers is still quite a challenge ahead of us.
Well, Brad, we appreciate the observations here, and we will undoubtedly be talking again as this process, with any luck, moves forward. Appreciate your time as always.
Thank you.
Brad Lubben with us from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. He is an Extension Agricultural Policy Specialist. You're listening to Agriculture Today. We'll be back in a moment with more here on the K-State Radio Network.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today continues now. Eric Atkinson with you. The 2018 Kansas winter wheat harvest is off and fully rolling now across a pretty broad swath of the state. And one of those hard-at harvests is K-State Research and Extension Wheat Production Specialist Romulo Lollato. He's been busy in recent days taking cuttings from K-State's wheat research plots around the state. He joins us from Hutchinson now. Romulo, we wanted to bring you in for a brief update on what you're seeing and hearing about concerning this harvest. And, of course, it'll all stem from what transpired with our winter wheat stands in the state pre-harvest. You might reflect on that a bit, if you would.
Hi, Eric. Yeah, so if we do a brief recap on this wheat growing season, right, what was Kansas wheat looking like and what did we expect going into harvest here? The number one concern that we had was definitely drought stress, right? For the majority of the state, we had quite a bit of rainfall in that early October, and then it really wasn't until April and sometimes even May that we had any significant or any measurable precipitation. So that drought stress was really severe. In southwest Kansas, we were seeing fields that were 9-10 inches tall and really thin and really drought stressed. Central Kansas, it was more of a hit and miss. So we were seeing very good-looking fields with good yield potential. And then 5 miles down the road, 10 miles down the road, just 10, 15 bushel per acre yield potential because of how spotty those spring precipitations were. So definitely drought, our number one concern. And then we were late going into the grain filling period as well. So temperatures during the winter, during the spring, they were below average up to late April, and that's really delayed the crop development. And our concern there will be heat stress during grain fill. May temperatures were very warm, and the crop really started speeding up in development, trying to catch up for that delayed development that we had before. And we pretty much compressed 2.5, 3 months of development there, typically from March through June, in a month and a half. So that all happened in May. So that really hurt our yield potential there, right? We really had to speed up towards the end of the cycle there. And parts of central Kansas really went from a nice green color before the Memorial Weekend to a white color after that Memorial Day weekend, just because of heat stress, really losing a lot of leaf area, those awns and the chaff and the entire plant really not that nice golden color that we like to see. So that's why we're seeing, even in parts of north central Kansas, the wheat's being harvested together with Sumner County. So it's like we are a few days ahead. It's never a good sign, right? We went from being behind in development to being ahead in development because of that heat stress. So that's definitely hurting our yield potential, hurting our test weights as well. Many fields that had a decent yield potential in April actually, I think, got hurt pretty bad with that heat stress, and our test weights came down. And that's kind of what this early harvest is really telling us.
This crop had so many obstacles to overcome. As you're harvesting K-State test plots yourself, and as you're talking with producers with harvest moving full speed in so many areas in the state currently, what is your assessment of what we're seeing then?
Yeah, so there's quite a bit of variability on the reports that we have been having from commercial fields being harvested and from our small plots as well. Now, the reports that we're getting, yields have been ranging anywhere from about 30s to, on the upper side, up to about 50s or so, whenever was a region that got maybe a little, or a field, really, that got somewhat more precipitation. Pretty large differences between the varieties as well. So I think we need to really wait until the end of harvest to see which varieties are actually going to do better this year. But overall yields have been ranging between that 30 and 40 for the most part, a few fields going up to about 50s or so. Test weights have been on the low side, so I heard anywhere from averaging about 55, 56. Some varieties in some regions as much as 61, but I don't think that's going to be the norm. And lowest reports that I heard were close to 51, 52, which is a big concern, especially if producers intend to keep that seed for next year.
Well, the 2018 wheat harvest story is yet to be completely told, of course, but one thing we might say in closing, Romulo, the recent hot weather, and you hinted at this earlier, has really accelerated this crop to the point where we may see harvests get in the bin in a relatively short order compared to what it could have been.
I think so. I think it's going to actually move much faster. As I mentioned before, Sumner County being harvested at the same time as Cloud County was in western Kansas yesterday, and some producers are talking about rolling later this week. So maybe by Saturday we'll see combines rolling in the entire state. So probably harvest is going to be shorter this year, just like it was in Oklahoma. Parts of Oklahoma are close to 100% harvested already, perhaps with the exception of the Panhandle, North Central, and Northeast parts of Oklahoma there. So really, I think we'll see something very similar here in Kansas now, where we will be border to border harvesting about the same time.
Well, Romulo, we'll let you get back to your wheat plot work, and we appreciate your observations, and very soon, with the harvest complete, we'll bring you back by studio and talk over the general assessment of the 2018 harvest in Kansas. Appreciate your time right here.
Sounds good, Eric. Thank you very much, and I look forward to talking to you here in the future again.
That's Romulo Lollato. He's a wheat production specialist, K-State Research and Extension, speaking with us from Hutchinson in south central Kansas this morning. Next up, this week's edition of the Kansas Wheat Scoop. Awaiting with that is Marcia Boswell. Marcia?
Wheat farmers shared their story with consumers this June when 9 food bloggers came to Kansas during wheat harvest. Food bloggers from all over the United States toured a wheat farm during harvest, a flour mill, and the Kansas Wheat Innovation Center as part of the #Wheat2Bread tour, hosted by Kansas Wheat and Red Star Yeast. On June 12th, the bloggers traveled to south central Kansas, where they met Kansas Wheat Commissioner Scott Van Allen in his wheat field. For many of them, they had never been to Kansas or a farm before, and each had the opportunity to harvest wheat with Scott in his combine. The bloggers asked questions about growing wheat, how farmers choose what to plant, and what farmers want their readers to know. Central Kansas wheat farmer Jenny Goring traveled with the group. The group got to see harvest at Jenny's farm in McPherson County on their way to New Cambria, Kansas, where they toured the Farmer Direct Foods flour mill. On June 13th, the bloggers toured the Kansas Wheat Innovation Center, where they learned about the research that goes into developing new wheat varieties. They will be sharing their stories of their time in Kansas during wheat harvest with their readers over the next several weeks. With a combined readership of more than 5.4 million followers, these bloggers are helping Kansas wheat farmers share their story with millions of consumers throughout the U.S. Follow Kansas Wheat on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to read their stories over the next few weeks. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia. And this is Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. This Agriculture Today concludes with the latest from the Weather Data Library here at K-State on Kansas agricultural weather. Welcoming in once again Mary Knapp, Research and Extension climatologist at K-State. And the heat prevails, Mary. That's the storyline here this week. It's been somewhat oppressive.
Right, particularly in the eastern part of the state, and we are under heat advisory through the weekend. And the real reason for that is not the upper temperatures, although we may hit the 100-degree mark. It's the nighttime temperatures that are staying in the mid-70s and warmer. I went and checked the weather observations at 7 a.m. here in Manhattan, and it was 80 degrees. Not a good scenario. That is one reason why we have a heat advisory this weekend and didn't have it last week. When we look at the weekly temperatures that went into the drought monitor, the Northeast was a hot spot in the state. Not that the western portions were not above normal, but they were about 4 degrees warmer than normal, whereas in the eastern part we were running in the 7 to 9 degrees warmer than normal. So again, not a good scenario for most situations. It has been rather beneficial for the wheat harvest. That has allowed the harvest to go ahead full steam, and it's going much faster than it might be usual. It's also earlier than usual. So again, that has been a side benefit.
But the conditions are awfully tough on livestock, as we've spoken of time and time again, and certain crops too.
Right. It's particularly tough on any kind of confined livestock because they simply can't move to a more comfortable spot. The other, as you noted, is for our row crops, in particular the corn and soybeans. Corn, we're beginning to see that signs of stress in the afternoon where the leaves roll up. There is a rapid progress in the vegetative stage, which means that we're going to be seeing tasseling and silking in short order. The question will be, do these high temperatures persist? Because even though genetics has been improved, we still are more sensitive or more vulnerable in that reproductive phase to those high temperatures. Soybeans, again, not particularly beneficial for that. And sorghum is just getting started. And coupling that with the dry conditions and the strong winds that we've been having, and we're going to have some really fast evaporative losses.
You mentioned the drought monitor, and you say, Mary, that folks might be surprised at the adjustments that have been made.
Right. What will probably be most notable is that the exceptional drought has been removed from the southwest part of the state. Keep in mind that what this is ranking the current conditions against historical values, and is it in the worst 1% of drought situations, or does it fall somewhere further up on the scale? And basically they're adjusting for those factors. Also keep in mind the difference between an exceptional drought and an extreme drought is not that big. I mean, if you're still in extreme and severe drought, you're in a pretty bad situation. It's not that there's been some magic recovery and everything and all of the impacts are gone. It's just not in the very, very worst condition that it might have been. There was an area that did have some deterioration, and that was in the central into the east central part of the state, where, again, we've looked at very low rainfall, a lot of impacts on the water supplies, and further deterioration in conditions there. And those were areas that had not been in that severe drought category until this week.
All right. Well, once we endure this weekend, which is to be quite dry and exceedingly hot in Kansas, there's a change coming early next week for the good?
Right. We're looking at a tropical disturbance down in the eastern Pacific off Baja California that's going to be making its way ashore this weekend and coming up through the desert southwest. When you look at the 6 to 10 day outlook, there's an area of very high chances of above normal precipitation that has a bullseye over Colorado, and that is going to move its way eastward and bring at least a tilt towards wetter than normal across Kansas. If we look at the quantitative precip forecast, where it's looking at how much moisture might we see from that system, and it's projecting mostly in the 2 inch to 1 3/4 inches in the western parts of the state, with the highest chances in that southwest corner. But as you move eastward, those amounts drop a little bit, and when you get to eastern Kansas, it's more in the 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch range. We'll take it, but that will not be what we would typically see in a week at this time of the year, which is more in the 1 to 1.25 inch range for eastern part of the state.
Then beyond next week, what's the outlook? Is there more to come?
Well, when we look at, to end the month, the 8 to 14, which carries us out to the 27th, is calling for normal precipitation. Not above normal, not below normal. They actually have normal on the map. And we'd take normal because that would mean that we'd at least get something out of that. So we'll have to see whether that changes as the systems progress. There is some chatter about a tropical system developing in the Caribbean, and if that comes on shore, we also have a chance that some of that moisture will make its way up to the Central Plains. At this point, that hasn't developed yet, so we'll be watching that for again, a potential for moisture for us.
But this storm in the Pacific is what we're really watching now, right?
Right. That's the one that's already beginning to be seen, and we're actually seeing some of the impacts from that because as that's moving up, it's bringing that upslope winds, which are driving our warm temperatures in the Central Plains at this time.
All right. Well, folks, hunker down for this weekend. And again, if you're in the throes of wheat harvest, it's just ideal. So take that as a positive. Mary, thank you once again, and we'll catch up with you next week.
Thanks, Eric.
Mary Knapp, research and extension climatologist at K-State. She's along with us each Friday to take a look at the latest on Kansas agricultural weather. Our time's away for today and the week. Peering ahead to Monday's broadcast for the cattle market commentary, we'll hear from Oklahoma State University's Darrell Peel. And we'll hear more from the crew at the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State. We'll have excerpts from the latest BCI Cattle Chat podcast. Along with more on Monday, please rejoin us then. Meantime, thanks for joining us here today. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.